Why Ron Paul? I really like his ideas. The more I hear of him and the more I see and the more I listen to him, the more I realize that he's the only candidate who really puts out the view that I hold.
What are the key issues?
The key issues, I think the economy, definitely our government, I think, is out of control. The bureaucracy and the machine that's in place, I think, needs to be changed.
Ron Berg, I'm here to support Ron Paul for president. The only candidate that can save this country from those who wish to turn us into a third world country.
So how do you see Dr. Paul doing that?
He has a vision. He's an economist. He's an educated man. He's a doctor. He knows the issues. He sees where this country's going, and he wants to turn around back to a constitutional republic.
Congressman Ron Paul. I don't need to tell you a whole lot about him. I have been an admirer of his since day one. I can't begin to tell you how much help he has been. He and his Liberty Committee, headed by Kent Snyder, who will be here on Saturday. But Ron has tried to get to these conferences before, but there's always been some kind of a glitch that prevented it. But when that happened, he always went out of his way to see that another member of the Liberty Committee was here to represent him. At this session, we are extremely fortunate to have our hero, Congressman Ron Paul.
It's good to be among friends. I never get that type of reception when I'm in Washington. Matter of fact, they don't pay much attention to me there. But there are a few people around the country, and that's what we're in this business for. But, you know, I want to just comment about Henry and his efforts over the years, especially these last 5 years, and his work with the United Nations. You know, you have to think, if we had more Americans like that, this country would be an awful lot better place to live. First off, I would like to thank all of you for the support you've given me in my operations, because so many of you have sent money and helped me. And if you've been on my list, you probably have received a letter not too long ago telling you a little bit about the campaigns going on in Texas and what's happening in the congressional races. So I'm going to very briefly go over that for those of you who aren't familiar with it. You know, we had the redistricting after 2000, which means I had a new district this last go-around, but because the Republicans took over the state House and the state Senate, they were able to bring up redistricting again, and you read about it happening once again. And we had 15 seats, and they had 17. And yet it's a very Republican state. So they did the redistricting, and they redesigned it, and it now is designed to give us 22 Republicans and the rest Democrats. But it just happened that when you looked at the statistics and looked at the numbers, which we all do when we're getting ready to run for our next race, it turned out that my district didn't get any better. It got a little worse, but it was still Republican, but it was 51% Republican. So I thought, well, you know, they didn't do me any great favors, and the comments I heard behind the scenes was, yeah, you know how to get independent people to vote for you, and I think they just really didn't care whether I had to work a little hard or not. So we were prepared, and we started our work and effort in organizing. But the funny thing that happened was that when the dust settled and everybody did the filing, it turned out I didn't have anybody file against me. somebody. Some don't have majors, but everybody has a candidate to run against. And when I tell my colleagues back in Washington, when they'll ask about the race, well, what kind of race do you have? I said, well, it's not too tough this year, because I don't have an opponent. I said, what? How can you not have an opponent with the way you vote? They make the assumption that voting for freedom is a liability, and it isn't a liability. And that, of course, has been my goal over the years. I first went to Congress in '76, stayed for 4 terms, decided I did not want to make a career out of being in politics. As a matter of fact, I thought it was a fluke that I won in the first place because I didn't think that would happen. Told my wife the first time I ran for Congress, when she told me she thought it was dangerous to run for Congress. I said, why in the world would it be dangerous? Which was a long time before 9/11. She says, well, it's dangerous because you could end up getting elected. But that, I assured her, could not happen because I was going to be pretty blunt about what I believed in. I thought that we were past that point where people would vote for anybody other than somebody who promises them anything and everything. So that was a surprise, and my goal has always been to vote the way I've said, follow the Constitution, and make sure that it doesn't reflect badly. That is, either lose the next election or do poor. And the first tour, when I had the four races to run, we did. We kept doing better. And this time we've kept doing better, so now we don't have an opponent. So I think this is truly important. It's important because if you're really, really out of step with one's district, you will get opponents. And the Democrat that represented the largest city that I inherited was put into a pretty strong Republican district. But he did polling in both and chose to run in a Republican district that had 65% Republicans versus ours that is 51%. Which means that a constitutional approach, a limited government approach, appeals across the board, and not only to the conservative Republicans. Sometimes that limited government approach is not all that, and all that received by some conservative Republicans. So our message that we have, the message of freedom, limited government, and Constitution, is appealing, and that has always been my goal, to make sure that we can popularize it and make it sure that people think it's in their best interest to vote for limited government. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to run again after having been out 4 years. Not to be a member of Congress, because that's very secondary, but it was to find out whether or not an individual like myself could win, because my reputation was much better known the second go-round, and as the years go on, even more so. So this to me is very encouraging. It should encourage others. And hopefully it would encourage those in Washington that are tempted to vote on principle but then drift away. But when the members come up to me and they kid me and they'll say, hey, how in the world did that happen? You don't have an opponent? I say, yeah, it's because I vote very cautiously. I vote middle of the road. I don't take any risks. Never vote by myself. And they just laugh because they know what I am saying about that. But it just turns out that if you vote the Constitution, this doesn't say much to me. It says something about them. That is that if you add up all the times people vote by themselves, I vote by myself more times than everybody else put together. Which tells you that somebody must not be, either I'm not interpreting things right, or they're not following the Constitution, and I think it's the latter. Not too many weeks ago, the former governor of New Mexico came to visit with me, Gary Johnson. Anybody remember Gary Johnson, governor of New Mexico? Well, he's an interesting guy, and he calls himself a libertarian. He's a strict constitutionalist, and he came in and we talked about a lot of things, but the one thing that we talked about was him being governor, and I didn't know all the details, but he had 2 4-year terms, which was sort of an historic event for a Republican in New Mexico, since it's basically a Democratic state. So, but the fascinating thing he told me was that during his time in office, he vetoed 700 bills. and only 2 of them were overridden, which tells us that we're on the right track because it indicates that even a more liberal democratic state, people aren't out there begging for more laws. You know, did the state fall apart because he didn't sign 698 bills? No, they probably were much better off. But so it isn't like there's a few of us. I think if we couch our message the right way, we can get people from all spectrums of the political philosophies to come in and join us, because we have to show that it's not in their interest to be, voting for big government.
So when did you first hear about Dr. Paul?
I've been known of Dr. Paul probably for 15 years, basically off of radio, shortwave. A few friends in Texas told me about him years ago, and I've heard him off and on radio programs. I haven't seen him very much on TV. For some reason, they want to exclude him from voicing his vision for this country. That's what makes him so popular, because he is telling the truth.
He's consistent, and he's for the Constitution, and it's great to be able to support someone who is have such integrity and such good beliefs.
Where are you from?
He's for getting rid of the central bank, which I think is a good idea.
Okay.
I'm from Van Buren, Arkansas.
Okay. And how old are you?
I'm 30.
Okay. Is your daughter?
That was my brother's daughter.
Okay. Okay. So as a 30-year-old man, what gets you excited about Dr. Paul?
Oh, I mean, all the issues that he brings up of, getting us out of the war. I don't think we should have been there. And then getting rid of the Federal Reserve, the fiat money system is great, and just reducing government.
You're a relatively young man. Have you voted before?
Yes.
Okay.
Every election.
Who have you voted for in the past?
I voted for George Bush the first time, not the second time. Mostly Republican in the past.
Okay.
Some
So
Democrats.
is Dr. Paul a true Republican, or what do you see?
Yeah, he's a true Republican. I mean, the Republicans have shifted over the years, so now you'd think he's different than most Republicans, but yeah, he's
So he's the real deal, and they've moved away from him.
That's right.
Well, Ron Paul is a vessel of freedom and liberty, and each of us are also vessels of freedom and liberty, and we ask many other Americans to be a part of freedom and liberty.
Do you think Americans can be trusted with their own liberty?
I certainly do. That's what the country was founded on, and it's accountability, and that's what this movement is all about.
Where do you think we're seeing government right now? Where's it at?
Well, government, it's in a precarious situation right now, and the American citizen definitely needs to take charge and do their part to make changes.
So you think government needs to take care of you from cradle to grave?
No, I don't.
We do have occasional victories in Washington, but not many. People ask me very often, they'll say, don't you get frustrated? How can you stand it with the people that you have to deal with and not winning and all these things? Don't you get really, really frustrated? And I tell them, and this is truthful, I'm never frustrated with it. It doesn't frustrate me one bit. I just have real low expectations. I don't go up there with the idea that I'm going to change the world tomorrow, and I have different goals. But I also know very clearly that I'm not going to be the next chairman of Ways and Means Committee or the Budget Committee. Matter of fact, if you're looking for an individual like me, or if my district expected me to be promoted and wield power and influence and all these things, it's just not going to happen. So that is another challenge, because there are some people who that's their main goal, not only as a politician, but as supporters back at home. So you have to find the supporters that will support these views, and that's why you're so important for an individual like myself. Because I don't have a basic rule against taking PAC money. It's legal to take PAC money, so I take PAC money. I said the only problem is I don't get it. I do get some, but those are the issue-oriented pack, you know. Gun owners of America and a few others. But basically, I don't get the business PAC money because they consider it a bad investment. You know, they expect to buy, to buy influence. And so I depend on people like you. My average donation over the years is about $38. And we have higher and we have a lot lower, but we have a lot of people that believe in limited government and believe in the Constitution and believe it's worth the effort. And that to me is a lot more important than having 2 or 3 really big donors and having access to influential business PAC money, and that to me is not the solution. And this is where I'm optimistic, is I believe our numbers are growing. And yet Washington hasn't changed. People ask me that all the time. Well, what's the difference between Washington of the 70s and early 80s versus now? In many ways, exactly the same. In some ways, worse. You know, the way the system works. The deficit spending, the wheeling and dealing, and go along to get along. That system is entrenched, and I think the money business, the money system, that is the PAC money system, is worse than ever. They're now spending about $160 million a month lobbying congressmen on their votes. I mean, this is big business. But there is a big difference between what the country is like today than it was, say, in 1976 when I first went to Washington. And there weren't groups like this. But I go around the country and talk to many groups like this. And there's a growing number. And just think of the ability for our groups to come together and organize and talk on the internet. The internet is fantastic. And this is something that wasn't available to us 25 years ago. So we have an ability now to do some things that we weren't able to do before, because it used to be that 99% of the information the American people got came from the 3 major networks. And I was always delighted when some newer ones came on. Now we have, 5 or so majors, but I'm not sure that's helped us a whole lot either at times. But the internet and other things have been very, very helpful.
It's an excellent day to support Ron Paul for president in 2008.
Why Ron Paul?
Ron Paul is the only candidate in the entire PAC that supports the Constitution. He bases everything on the Constitution. We begin with the Constitution, we end with the Constitution. If we don't support Ron Paul, we will lose our Constitution, we'll lose our liberties, we'll lose our freedom.
I thought the Constitution was a living document.
The Constitution is a living document. It's been alive now for over 200 years, and we need to go back to it. It's been put in a shelf. We have a president today that disrespects it with his language, with his actions, and it's no longer appropriate. So it's just time to go back to the Constitution.
Why is the Constitution so important?
The Constitution lays, well, if you want to really know why the Constitution is so important, you have to go back and study Aristotle and Aristotle's politics. And what Aristotle said in his politics is that in a republic, the Constitution is the government. It defines the limits and the bounds of government. It binds down government that turns tyrannical by the chains of the Constitution. And that is the only form of government that's acceptable in a republic.
I have a little group in Washington that I started called the Liberty Committee, and those of you who are on my mailing list know about it. The Liberty Committee is a political action group that talks to people out of Washington, people like you, and tell you what's going on, and then try to influence your congressman on special votes. Like with the UN votes coming up, they tell you, and that is what Henry was alluding to, and Kent Snyder will be here. But the committee also is made up of a group of members of Congress, and it's called the Liberty Caucus. And my personality is such, and also the way I think the country will change, isn't by believing that I can be a strong influence and take 15 or 20 people, have them hold steady and negotiate and demand and this sort of thing, and sort of get in the fray of things like everybody else is doing. Mine is to try to persuade people to believe it for the right reason and to stand firm and by influence back at home. If there's enough influence back at home, then they'll vote the right way or they'll come to that conclusion. And for that reason, I don't go around saying, will you join, will you join? But people come and say, can I join? And some are pretty good voters. Helen was a member of our committee, and she was a great voter. But I'm waiting for her to come back to Washington. That's what I'm waiting for. But a lot of members will come to join for their political benefit. It's sort of a cheap benefit for them. If they're sort of moderate conservative, they'll get some grief back at home from people like you, and they'll say, why don't you help Ron Paul more? Why won't you do this? And they'll put enough pressure on them, they'll come and join. And some people get angry at me, and they say, well, if they're not going to stand firm and vote right every time, why do you let them in? Why do you do this? For a very precise reason. I think that's a positive step. The fact that, the way I operate and the way I vote and what I do, and it's very clear what I stand for, if they think there's a political benefit to being, signing up and being part of our organization, I think that is a net positive. So this is the reason why if you get frustrated and say, well, why aren't they voting in bloc? Well, it wasn't set up to do that. It's set up more as an educational, influential group to get people to become more aware of what's happening. But this past week, we had one of our best successes on our votes. In 1984, I think it was, that Ronald Reagan chose to get us out of UNESCO. A good thing to do. I mean, if you want to talk about all of the UN, the UNESCO is one of the worst aspects about international control of education, all the nasty stuff they do. Last year, Bush, our conservative president, put us back in UNESCO. I had a vote last year on it, and to try to not get back in. And this year, all I could do was just to defund it. So we had a vote, we had the amendment, and we got a vote, and we had, I think, 140 some people voted against it. But the interesting thing is that all 23 members of the Liberty Committee voted to defund UNESCO. I wish I could say that with the next vote that we have. The next vote after UNESCO was to totally defund the United Nations. And one good part of that was we had more votes than ever before. We got up to 83 this time, which means if we got 83 willing to put their name on the dotted line on something they see as controversial, I bet you there's twice that many that would, really like to do it, but they feel like they can't take the risk of doing it. But that's the best number that we've had, and 21 out of our 23 members voted to defund the United Nations, which means with persistence and the work that's done and the work that this organization does, that the pressure on the members of Congress are getting such that they are starting to reflect your viewpoint. So the issue, to me, is never a negotiation in Washington to solve the problems of the country. And this is why, of course, I don't get frustrated. I don't go with the expectation that I'm going to the House floor and I'm going to give a great speech and they're all going to do what I ask them to do. It just doesn't work that way. The system works differently. That's why you're so important. The system works by prevailing attitudes and opinions of the people putting pressure on members of Congress who may lose their seat if they get out of step. And if there were more like you, the vote wouldn't be 83, it would be 283. That means we've done some good, but we haven't done enough good. But not only the United Nations, but on all the issues. We have, unfortunately, for our country, for the 20th century has not been friendly toward us. We have lost a lot. We were given a lot as a country, and we have lost a lot. And it was a systematic undermining of the concept of liberty all through the 20th century. And that's what we're dealing with. So here we are in the 21st century trying to restore the great principles of this nation. And I don't even know what the outcome will be. I work with a bit of optimism, believing that if it's to be, it's to be, and I don't worry about tomorrow. All I worry about is what we should do today and what is right and do our best job. And sometimes we have more successes than we even realize. Just like telling my wife, there's no way that's going to happen. Oh yeah, you're going to get elected. People are going to listen to you, and people are going to believe you. So we just don't know. But we do know what our responsibilities are. And that is, for a group like this, our responsibility is to make sure that for every one of us, you find 10 new supporters, 10 new believers. And everybody has a job in a different way, and it's going to be different for one person versus another. I happen to think that the long-term battle for the country is an educational battle. I don't believe it's a political battle. But when the education occurs, and then we will have the political fights, and then we will win them.
What do you think about Governor Huckabee's run?
He's up in the polls. You see him in the newspaper a lot. I think he's socially conservative, but governmentally liberal.
Okay, and that's a problem?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he believes in big government. He's going to do about the same thing Bush has done.
So what do you see as far as our current situation in the United States? What's our biggest problem? What do we need to focus on?
We need to focus on getting ourselves out of the war and bring our troops home. And we need to focus on our economy and the real cause of the economy, which is the Federal Reserve and how they put money into our economy and cause the inflation that's taking away money from our seniors and from all the middle class and poor people. They're getting taxed through inflation.
So when Dr. Paul talks about the hidden inflation, our money is devaluing, what does that say to you? What do you hear when it says that?
Well, I hear that the value of what I had in my pocket just keeps going down every time they lower interest rates and prop up our economy. And it's hurting, the people it hurts the most is those on fixed incomes, like our senior citizens.
So some people say, well, why are you in politics then? You shouldn't be doing this. You should be teaching. And I have so much respect for the people who teach and think of all the good economic teaching that has occurred in the last 25 years versus what happened from the Depression on up into the 70s when there were probably 2 people in the whole country that really understood and taught Austrian economics. There was a period of time in the mid part of the 20th century that we only had one real key organization that understood and promoted the cause of liberty, and that was the Fee Foundation, Leonard Read's group, which was a big influence on me in my life because they were able to restore and promote and publish literature because we didn't have it. But those things are all so much better today and much improved. So there's really reason for us to persist that way. But some of us will run for politics. Some of us will support other candidates. Some will be in education. Some will sponsor groups like this. But everybody has a job to do. And otherwise, it won't happen. And we should never take for granted what we have, because a lot of people would argue with us who show concern about what's happening in the country. And this is more or less what I face when I talk about monetary policy. Of course, yesterday, Greenspan was before the banking committee, and I had my 5 minutes with him. But my arguments and the arguments of those of us who understand the financial system is that this country is in bad shape. And this country is not as wealthy as a lot of people think. And yet, on the surface, people say, you worry too much. It's going fine. We don't have, government tells us there's no inflation. Unemployment is not all that bad. It's been worse. And we can handle the deficits. People just worry too much. I believe we live in very, very precarious conditions. In difficult times. And they're unique in the history, not only of this country, probably unique in the history of the world. Because we have, over these last 50 years or so, devised an international system of fiat money that literally has taken the dollar and taken gold and used the dollar to substitute for gold. We as a nation have gained the privilege of printing endlessly the money. And we have been able to borrow and finance our extravagance. If you've enjoyed any benefits from the housing bubble, housing prices going up or getting a low interest rate, you can't be harping against the foreigners, because it's those foreigners who are taking our money and then giving it back to us, and they're holding our paper. They buy Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the only reason they get money is we print it, and then we buy all these goods from overseas. And in a way, it's a gift. And then they loan it back to us, but it's going to come to an end. It won't last, never has. The current account deficit in international debt is outrageously high, and so it will end. It's something like if each one of us were given $1 million and we walked out here and we had $1 million to spend in the next 3 weeks. We would be we would be living very well. But if we had to pay it back after 3 weeks or a year or something, then there would be some difficulty. And a country pays back, but it's a little more difficult to figure out when and how. And the people who pay back sometimes aren't the same ones who got the benefits. That's the real corruption about the monetary system. Now I do discuss monetary policy a lot, and matter of fact that was the most motivating factor when I ran in the 70s due to the inflation and the wage and price controls. But actually my policy is not that complex. What I would do if I had my way. I would do two, well, they're really the same thing. One is we would obey the Constitution, make gold and silver as legal tender, and we'd get rid of the Federal Reserve. That would solve a lot of problems, go a long way, but the difficulty would be the transition. And the one reason why I do talk about the money issue so much is not only because of the economic problems it causes. You know, when central banks create money out of thin air and give you artificially low interest rates, it is the source of the business cycle. It causes the bubbles, it causes overinvestment and malinvestment, and it causes speculation and all the debt, and then these bubbles have to collapse like the NASDAQ bubble had to collapse. And that's very important because that deals with prosperity and what's happened in the country. And in inflation, when a country is destroyed, currency is destroyed, wealth is taken from the low middle income and middle class and transferred to the wealthy. And there is a transfer of real wealth, and then there's political disruption. But the real reason, the economics are really important, but the real reason why I think the gold standard and commodity money is so important is that it restrains government spending. It prohibits government spending outside of what one is taxed. Because if you give the power to a central bank or a government to print money out of thin air, create credit out of thin air, they always do, and they always ruin things. But what do they do in the meantime? It pays for the bills. So Congress has no reason to really restrain themselves in spending money overseas and domestically. So what are we doing? We have embarked now on nation building and warmongering all over the world, and nobody in Washington seems to be worried. They really don't. They don't seem to be worried about the spending and the deficit. At the same time, as you get a conservative Republican in, and conservative Congress, you think there'd be a little bit of restraints. Maybe you could excuse them and say, oh, well, they're always for all this military stuff. But what about the entitlements? What about prescription drugs and No Child Left Behind? Will that be a Republican program too? Sure, that's all been going on, and the spending continues, and they just delay the payment. If you were on a gold standard, you would have to tax each and every dollar for that. And there'd be more in this room then if they had to pay each day for the government they're getting. So this to me would be an important way on restraining government.
You're obviously a man that's seen a few things in your lifetime. What brings you to the point where you're going to support a guy like Ron Paul?
I've supported him he's the only politician I ever had sticker on my car.
Okay.
And I've been supporting him. I used to joke with the people down in Texas that I was the Arkansas headquarters for Ron Paul's reelection.
Okay.
Because I've lived here in Arkansas for about 12, 14 years, something like that.
Okay. So what is it that Dr. Paul stands for that really touches your heart?
He's strictly a constitutionalist. Republican is on a secondary. they like to call him a libertarian, but he is strictly a constitutionalist. And the Constitution has provided us a very wonderful country for years, and now they're trying to get rid of it. And there's very hard pressure, something that would help people, but they don't like, sometimes they don't like some of the article. If they read American Free Press, they could get forewarnings of a lot of things that goes on that they don't get by any other source.
What do you have memories of the Depression?
No, yes, I was quite young then, but I have little. I'm a depression person.
Okay, what do you think in terms of Dr. Paul's talking about we need to get back to the gold standard, we need to rearrange our currency. Do you think we're headed in a direction towards what was similar to the Depression?
I see us headed for a depression, and I think the depression is going to be a excuse, and they've been looking for an excuse to get the Amero in.
Oh boy.
And I think that's where it's going to come in.
Okay, so back in the 30s, 29 when it occurred, then the 30s when it actually set in, Americans were a different breed of people than they are today. Can you give me any thoughts on that? In other words, we were more agriculturally oriented, people were able to provide food for themselves, and it doesn't seem like there's much of that anymore.
No, they're trying to get rid of the powers to be, I'll put it that way, the powers to be are trying to get rid of, I just got a notice last night over email that they've passed this business of counting all the animals. We've tried, Arkansas, I think we put more pressure on that than many of the other states. And from what I hear, it's already been passed now that you'll have to identify your animals so they can track all the animals. So they know how many you got, how many you eat, how many you sell, how many you buy. And this is more federal control, so keep track of us because they're trying to get rid of agriculture, animal raising, anything, so it'll come from the foreign countries.
Why would they want to do something like that?
To drive our standard of living down, so we're down on a standard of living equal to China, India, and these countries. Maybe not that far down, but down where we're competitive, say, with the standard of living in Mexico.
So he who controls the food controls the people.
That's it. It's been stated years ago.
We have all this wonderful farmland, but yet we're not getting a price for the food for the farmers.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Okay. What's your background? What have you done through your life?
I've served in Korea. I worked for an oil company for 35 years down in Texas.
Okay.
And so I understand the oil industry.
All right, here, let me ask you this question. A friend of mine said he was over in Oklahoma in the 80s putting in wells, and as fast as they put them in, they cap them up. And he said there's a bunch of wells over there that are just capped up. They're not even being used. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the thoughts on that is Saudi Arabia, like right now, they'll run the price of oil up. So all these exploration companies get in there and they spend lots of money getting drilling rigs and exploring for wells, and they find one that looks good, they'll cap it so they get enough of them to make it profitable to tie them all together. But before that time comes, Saudi Arabia drops the price, and then these oil companies go out of business. You can go through Oklahoma and Texas and see just everywhere rusted old trucks, exploration trucks. Okay. And that's been done over and over, so people are reluctant to get into exploration.
Okay.
But they're at it again now.
Jack it up, take it down. What about Governor Beebe's idea that we need to put some tax on natural gas? Have you seen that?
It's been fuel has been taxed to death, and we don't need more tax on it. We got enough tax right now. Half of what they get is.
Now, I serve on international relations as well as financial services. The first 4 terms that I had, I was on financial services, which was banking. So I've maintained an interest, and that's not considered one of the top-notch committees, so I've been able to stay on that committee. When I went back into the Congress in '97, I requested to be on international relations because I've had a growing interest in what I consider a very, very flawed foreign policy that was designed by Woodrow Wilson and promoted, and that is the purpose of us assuming the responsibility of making the world safe for democracy. I decided that was not good policy. I asked them to be on the committee, and they said no. Oh yeah, no. They first said, "Oh, no problem. International relations is not a good, a high class committee either, and banking isn't. So you can have your choices. You're going to get on." Then the leadership on our side came back to me the week later, and they said, well, you can be on financial services, but you can't be on international relations. I said, well, last week you said it was okay. They said, yeah, but we checked, and they decided you shouldn't be on there. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, somebody said that you wouldn't vote for foreign aid. Is that true? I said, absolutely, I'm not going to vote for foreign aid. So it was in their interest, to have somebody that would accommodate all the foreign aid and some special foreign aid as well. So I was not permitted to be on there. But after a few years, I did finally get on after 4 years. And I was on the committee during the debate for the war, for the police action, this UN police action. But the resolution to go to war against Iraq came up for international relations. That would have been in October of 2002. And I'm still old-fashioned about war and the Constitution, too. I still think that if we are committed to fight a war and send our kids and your money off to fight, that there's only one way it should be done, and that's a full declared war resolution. My argument being that look at the problems we've had since World War II, that we have not declared war. I mean, think of the disaster of Korea going in under the United Nations, and because the UN said we're supposed to go, and other police action. We've been there for 50-some years. I think I added up once on the cost in real terms. It's over $1 trillion. The troops are still there. Makes no sense whatsoever. Has nothing to do with national security. It diminishes our national defense and jeopardizes our national security. But the Vietnam War was no better. It was on, and we haven't won these wars. So my conclusion is not only is it the law of the land, but it's not good policy. So when it came to the committee, I brought up the resolution of a declaration of war resolution. It was copied, off the World War II declaration, just changed the terms. And I made them vote on it. And when I introduced the resolution, I said, you're going to have to vote this down because I'm not going to vote for it. But I think you should vote on this and decide whether or not you want to declare war. And that's when they got very unhappy and very annoyed. And it was explained to me by the chairman of the committee and he was very annoyed. And he said that he wanted to let me know that portion of the Constitution was an anachronism and we no longer follow it.
What's his name?
Chairman of International Relations. And then the ranking member, minority member, got his pitch in. He joined in. He says, for Mr. Paul, Texas, to bring this up, this is just frivolous to make us go through this. And somebody else said it was totally impractical. But what did the resolution say? The resolution said that we should go to war. We shouldn't go to war. We should allow the president to go to war when and if he decides. Because he had the responsibility of making sure that the UN resolutions were enforced. They mentioned the UN 21 times in that resolution. They never mentioned Article 1, Section 8, or the Constitution once. So what we did on that very day, and when we voted in the House and the Senate, was to amend the Constitution, transferring power, illegally amending the Constitution, ignoring the Constitution, transferring the power and responsibility from the Congress and giving it to the President. And it used to annoy me to no end when I would hear endlessly as the months went, because we didn't go to war for 5 or 6 months. Well, I haven't decided when we're going in. I haven't decided if we have to or not. I mean, it just is so bad that we as a people have gotten to the point where we can allow our president to say he was going to make this decision. But the blame shouldn't be on him as much as on the Congress. Somebody said, well, when presidents do these things, why don't you introduce resolutions to impeach? I said, yeah, what we need to do is impeach the whole Congress. So we ended up going in, but I was strongly opposed to the war, not only because of the process, but also because, for very practical reasons, that our national security wasn't threatened. And there were a lot of other reasons that we won't go into now because it would take too long, but really motivated our presence over there. But very simply, the analogy that I use when I'm talking to some of my Republican friends who are annoyed because I haven't, it isn't so much I have a position, but I haven't supported the president, and they get annoyed. I said, why don't you look at it this way? What if China became a little stronger and had the upper hand, and they were importing oil from the United States, and they had co-ownership of some oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico? And they decided that they wanted to put the Chinese Navy in the Gulf of Mexico and then put a base in Texas. What would you think? I mean, do you think it would annoy a few of us? It certainly would, but that is the equivalent. Our whole Navy, submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers all over the Persian Gulf. We have bases in countries that, when we had bases in Saudi Arabia, which was considered a violation of their Holy Land, and we don't understand, our country doesn't quite understand how they saw this, then we wonder why they get upset, and then they say, well, the main reason is that they attack us because we're free and prosperous. I don't buy that. I don't. So what do we do about not being, if they're worried about us being too free? So we sort of accommodate them. So we hurry. Within days, we pass massive legislation, such as the Patriot Act, to make sure we are less free. The Patriot Act came up rather quickly. The version that we voted on in the House was not available until 1 hour before, and you had to search for it on the internet. The bills were switched around. There was 1 hour of debate. And the members of Congress could possibly have read it. And the Patriot Act is a blatant destruction of severe undermining of the Fourth Amendment and should never have been passed. Last week we had a vote on trying to clean up the Patriot Act to a degree. We had a vote on making sure that the federal government, without search warrants, couldn't go into your libraries and find out what books you're reading. Just go and look at the list and see what books all Americans are reading without proper search warrants. And that vote was won by 219 to 201. And we thought, well, we're making progress, you know. Once again, the members of Congress, many of them who voted for the Patriot Act, haven't all of a sudden became strict constitutionalists. They've been hearing back from back home. And they're sick and tired of some of this, so the vote was very positive. But that was one of those votes that didn't close. And it went for 40 minutes. 12 Republicans switched their votes. And it finally was defeated. Because that's what the administration wanted. Matter of fact, the administration wants to strengthen the Patriot Act. And in Patriot Act 2, one of the provisions in that would be that it would be made much easier for our government to deny citizenship in order to preclude you having due process. But it's only for terrorists. Of course, the problem is who do we know are the criminals if you don't have a trial? But the assumption is oh no, we would only do this to the people that we know are the bad guys. The precedent is horrible. And it's just further undermining the principles of the Constitution and the rule of law.
What we have up there, other than Ron Paul, is the lesser of two evils. He's the man that doesn't have any skeletons in his closet. Everybody else does.
Yeah, that's why they don't like it so much. What do you say, partner, when you talk about? Give me your name first of all.
My name is William Parsons.
Where are you from?
Mansfield, Arkansas.
Okay. What do you say to that when somebody says he can't win?
Well, as my friend here alluded to, that people say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. The other candidates, it's still evil. So you haven't helped your cause any. And Ron Paul is the only candidate I have seen in my lifetime, possibly with one or two exceptions, that represents the people and the Constitution of the United States. And to people who won't support him or say he don't have a chance to win, well, with that kind of an attitude, they need to have an attitude adjustment, and if they want to get out from under this system of bondage we're under.
Why do they exclude him from debates? And when he's in a debate, they do round after round and never ask the man any questions. Alan Keyes was in one debate, and they eluded him, and he finally spoke up and stopped everything until they went to him, and then they went to Paul. It's quite obvious to me that they don't want to hear the truth.
Okay. Do we have to vote for something, whether it's going to win or not, because it's right? We need to stand for what's right no matter what.
Amen, brother.
Right, yes.
We need to stand up for what's right, and our forefathers stood up for what's right and won their independence from the mightiest nation on the earth at that time, the Empire of Great Britain. Militarily, economically, they were the superpower of the day. And who would have thought that a few thousand colonists would have had any kind of a chance against such a superpower? And but they relied on our Father in heaven, the Almighty God, and as one I've read, their battle cry was "No king but Jesus."
Yeah, okay.
Amen.
Now, did you hear the numbers? I heard numbers that said something like 90% or 80% were apathetic, 10% were against, and 10% were for the revolution. Did you hear those numbers?
The numbers that I've read is there was like 3 million residents in the colonies at that time. That less than a third actually supported the movement at all, and less than like 100,000 which actively participated in any form. Okay. Not necessarily combatants, but support of any form.
And the rest were loyalists.
Okay. Do we have much more time, do you think, in this nation?
No, we don't. I think this is the last hoorah. This election here. If we can't get Ron Paul in and this election, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
Now, some folks have said it might not be a bad thing to get somebody like Hillary in there because it would really fire up the constituents, the people that are serious. What do you say to that idea?
I'd say Hillary would polarize this country like no other president ever has.
Okay, but now the argument goes, and I think it's a good argument. Folks, not me, folks voted for G.W. Bush, and look what we got. It was much more stealth that came across. With Hillary, they say it would be more in your face, more obvious, and we'd have a clear battle line. Did you follow that argument?
I broke the left from 10 years ago.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't necessarily agree with it. With when she was co-president with Bill,
Billary?
Yeah. Well, this is whatever you want to call that, 8 years of that presidency. She ran. She was the power behind the scenes from everything I can find out about that situation, and so I think one term was enough.
We have two issues to deal with. One is what kind of government do we want, and what do you think the role of government ought to be, and what moral basis should the government have this authority, and how limited it should be. And that's the scope of government. The other part is the rule of law. Now, I think the rule of law is in sad shape because we routinely ignore it. And not only, I've already talked about how the Congress does it, presidents for 100 years have done it, and then the Congress, allow the agencies to develop, which are under the president, and They write rules and regulations like crazy, and they become the law of the land, and we don't hardly say anything. Under the strict interpretation of the Constitution, we certainly wouldn't have an IRS back on our doors. We should get rid of that, along with repealing the 16th Amendment. But once again, it's the motivation for big government that prompts all that, and we have to wean the American people off this desire to have such big government. My idea of the ideal amendment to the Constitution, and I am rather reluctant to amend the Constitution, but there is one amendment that I'm enthusiastically supportive of, and that is the Liberty Amendment. The Liberty Amendment gets rid of the income tax, it repeals the 16th Amendment, and it also gets rid of, within 3 years, everything the government's doing that's illegal and unconstitutional. And that would change things around rather quickly. But it has been, a real experience for me to go to Washington in several different decades, 70s and early 80s, and now. And as I said, there's reason for us to be hopeful, but also reason for us to realize what kind of a job we have lying before us. For me, all political action should have one goal, only one, and that is to promote liberty. Nothing else. I think the founders of this country understood it very clearly. That was the goal. It wasn't to regulate us. The Constitution was written, and it was written for one purpose, not to restrain you in any way. It was written to restrain the government. And we have forgotten that. And if we don't restore that, then I think we will continue to lose more freedoms and, of course, more prosperity as well. But the purpose of liberty, if we gain our liberty, which was basically what we had for a good many years, at least more than anybody else ever had, far from perfect, but better than anybody else. But if we live in a free society and enjoy our liberty, then the responsibility falls on us, the individual. The individual becomes the king, the important person, in the economic sense or in the personal sense. We become responsible for our lives, and nobody else is responsible for it. Then hopefully that will spill over into being responsible for our families and our friends and neighbors and our churches and our local communities and hospitals or whatever. But that the purpose of a free society and individuals being left alone is to strive for excellence and virtue, which is something that most people in Washington would still say, well, that is a good idea. But what they do is they distort the meaning and the purpose of government. Yes, they say that we should be virtuous and we should be excellent and we should be fair, the economy should be fair, and that we should make sure that nobody's left behind. In order to do that, governments have to use force. If they want to make the economic system fairer, which is the promotion of liberals, but if there's a conservative who say, well, I'm going to make you a better person, and make sure that you don't drink too much, and you don't smoke too much, and you don't eat too much, and all these kind of things, then we will have rules and regulations. They have to use force. So anytime the government is permitted to pursue the goals that we should pursue as individuals, that of striving for virtue and excellence, when government does it, it's exactly the reverse. It's the opposite, because they can't do it without taking away your freedoms.